We are honored today to host a panel featuring two distinguished speakers. Ambassador Maen Areikat is the chief PLO representative to the United States. Prior to this, Ambassador Areikat worked for 11 years at the Negotiations Affairs Department of the PLO, notably as Deputy Head and Coordinator General from 2008 to 2009. Before this, Ambassador Areikat worked for the Orient House in Jerusalem, where he acted as the spokesman for the late Mr. Faisal Husseini and later as a desk officer for the United States, Canada, Australia, and South Africa. Ambassador Areikat is joined by Professor John Quigley, the President's Club Professor of Law at the Michael E. Moritz College of Law at Ohio State University, where he has been part of the faculty since 1969. Prior to this, Professor Quigley worked as a research scholar at Moscow State University and as a research associate at Harvard Law School. A specialist on international human rights, his numerous publications have spanned a variety of fields, and I can say that his most recent book, The Statehood of Palestine, International Law in the Middle East Conflict, is sitting on my desk for lunchtime reading. For those of you who are watching our live webcast, you can send your comments and questions to the panel while watching online by tweeting to @PalestineCenter. Also, you can participate via Facebook in our live chat roll. Without further ado, we will begin with remarks from Yusuf Munayyer, the Executive Director of the Palestine Center, followed by Professor Quigley, Ambassador Areikat, and a question and answer session. Thank you.
When I saw the book that Professor Quigley wrote, The Statehood of Palestine, International Law and Middle East Conflict, that came out last year, I thought this was the perfect person to have speak on this issue, and we're very happy to have him here to talk to us about the legal questions surrounding statehood and Palestine and some of the procedural intricacies in this initiative at the United Nations. So I will turn it over to Professor Quigley.
When Yitzhak Rabin concluded the Declaration of Principles in 1993 with Yasser Arafat, he got some objection in the Knesset from members that thought that what was going on was that Israel was actually recognizing Palestine as a state. And one member of the Knesset, this is dialogue in the floor of the Knesset, referring to the Declaration of Principles, said, when you walk into the zoo and see an animal that looks like a horse and has black and white stripes, you do not need a sign to tell you this is a zebra. It is a zebra. When you read this agreement, the Declaration of Principles, even if the words Palestinian state are not mentioned there, you do not need a sign. This is a Palestinian state. So the member of Knesset was saying that Israel had, in effect, recognized Palestine as a state. Would anyone like to hazard which member of Knesset was the... Very good, yes, Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think Netanyahu really expressed an accurate concept of what it means to be a state. That is, when an entity is accepted by other states as a state, that is what makes it a state. It doesn't necessarily have to be formal recognition or the establishment of diplomatic relations, but the Declaration of Principles said that borders were supposed to be negotiated. Now, who negotiates borders? I mean, you don't negotiate a border with Amnesty International. You negotiate a border with an entity that has sovereignty over a piece of territory, namely a state. So I think on that issue, it's quite clear that Palestine does constitute a state. And without belaboring the point, I think I would, if I had time, I would take you back to the period of the League of Nations when Palestine was set up as the Ottoman Empire was being terminated. And the Treaty of Lausanne of 1923, which was the treaty by which Turkey gave up its territories, refers to the various Arab territories, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, as states. It says that they're states. And there were cases before the courts, before the Permanent Court of International Justice at that period, where these entities were found to be states. So Palestine statehood is not something new. The 1988 declaration actually didn't purport to be saying we are declaring a new state. That declaration refers back to the Treaty of Lausanne and to the League of Nations period. But I do want to focus mainly on what is happening right now and what could happen at the United Nations. There are a number of possibilities that could be pursued. One would be a General Assembly resolution that would call on states to recognize Palestine as a state. That's something that it would be appropriate to do in the General Assembly. Another is to ask the General Assembly to change the designation of the observer mission of Palestine to an observer state. What's been done already comes very close to doing that, but it doesn't come 100% towards doing that. And the third, probably the most interesting, is to apply for membership in the United Nations. And I think I'll focus mainly on this third option because it's the one that has the most technical issues involved. An application is made actually not to the General Assembly but to the Secretary General of the UN. That is an entity that wants to become a member state. Files a letter with the Secretary General saying, we want to become a member. It's like applying to some organization, kids in a school or something. And all you have to say is that we agree, we're willing and able to carry out the obligations of a member. So that's really all that is required. It's very simple. It's being done actually this week with respect to the Republic of South Sudan, which declared its independence on Saturday, and the General Assembly and Security Council are likely to have it as a member. I haven't followed the news this morning. It may already have happened as far as I know. But what the Secretary General then does is to refer it to the Security Council and a copy to the General Assembly. So action is supposed to happen first in the Security Council, and if there's a session of the General Assembly coming up, it's supposed to deal with it so that it makes a recommendation within not less than 25 days in advance of the next session of the General Assembly. And that's why you perhaps have heard discussion that this might be filed rather soon, within the next week or two, so that the Security Council would have time to deal with it and get it to the General Assembly before 25 days in advance of the start of the September session of the General Assembly. What happens in the Security Council? There's a provision in the Security Council rules that it's supposed to set up a committee to discuss and analyze the application, but it doesn't have to do that if it doesn't want to. It is supposed to make a recommendation. The Charter of the UN says that admission of a state is effected by the General Assembly upon recommendation of the Security Council. So the Security Council goes through a procedure and then tells the General Assembly what it thinks. And whether it says yes or no, it has to give the General Assembly a full record of its proceedings and an analysis of the issue, so that it's not just a question that the Security Council could say no, and that's the end of the matter. That's not the way it happens under the UN Charter. The Security Council has to explain in full its reasons to the General Assembly, in particular if it's saying no. Then the General Assembly, under its rules, has the possibility of referring the matter back to the Security Council and saying to the Security Council, I'm assuming now it's a negative recommendation, the General Assembly asks the Security Council, well, are these reasons really valid reasons? And maybe you should think about it again. And this could go on for quite some time. I mean, an application, as I say, of the Republic of South Sudan is dealt with very quickly, but when it has some issues involved, it could take some time. For example, the State of Israel applied in November of 1948. And the Security Council wasn't quite sure what to do with it and sat on it for a while. And eventually it did make its recommendation in the spring of 1949, and the General Assembly admitted Israel in May of 1949. So it's not clear exactly how the matter will go. So in that sense, I mean, one could make an argument that it might make sense to ask the General Assembly to call the observer mission an observer state, and also apply for admission at the same time, because that might take somewhat longer. This process of back and forth, I think, assuming that there would be a veto by the United States, would be a bit awkward for the United States, in that the International Court of Justice has said that in considering an application for membership, the Security Council may consider only those factors that are specified in the UN Charter. That is, the idea is that the UN is to be a universal organization of all states. So any state that is peace-loving and that is willing and able to carry out the obligations is supposed to be admitted. So that if a permanent member of the Security Council says, well, we agree that this particular entity is a state, that it's peace-loving, and that's willing and able to carry out the obligations, but we just don't like it, that's not valid. Or if, for example, a permanent member might say, with respect to a Palestine application, we think that Palestine should be admitted only when it comes to terms with Israel and signs an agreement, that would similarly be something outside the Charter and would be an invalid reason. That's why I say that this process of back and forth might be awkward for the United States. One other issue that comes up in this regard, and this I think you hear largely from European states, is they say, well, we don't recognize Palestine yet, so we should not admit it as a member. Those two things are very different. That is, the fact of being a state on the one hand, and whether another particular state recognizes it on the other. And the latter is not necessary for the former. In fact, to go back again to the example of Israel's application, 1949, very few states had recognized Israel as a state in 1949, but the General Assembly voted to admit it as a member. So they were saying, well, it's a state, but even those states that had not recognized it voted for it nonetheless. So that's something I think it's very important to get across to member states, especially some in Europe that seem to be hung up on this issue of recognition. Now, again, what would happen if the Security Council votes no, let's say, or there's a resolution that has enough votes to pass. It has 9 votes, which is the requirement in the Security Council, but there's a veto. Could the General Assembly go ahead and admit Palestine anyway? This is something which is not very clear. To date, this has never happened. That is, the General Assembly has never tried to admit a state where the Security Council has not had a completely unanimous vote. But it's not at all clear under the Charter that the General Assembly cannot do that. The Charter, as I say, says that decisions to admit an applicant state are made by the General Assembly upon recommendation of the Security Council. It doesn't say specifically that the recommendation has to be in favor. One other possible reading of this article is that the General Assembly has to consider the recommendation of the Security Council, but then may go ahead and do whatever it likes. In fact, that is an interpretation that is very consistent with the drafting history of this provision, Article 4 of the Charter of the United Nations. It's quite clear from the drafting history that the intent behind it was that the Security Council's role was advisory only, and that it was up to the General Assembly to make decisions about admissions. This matter was heavily debated in the 1940s when it was mainly the Soviet Union that was exercising the veto, and the United States was taking the opposite position. The United States, in fact, in 1949 said that it would never exercise the veto on an application for membership in the United Nations. And it did that to put pressure on the Soviet Union. Now the shoe is on the other foot. I haven't heard the Obama administration mentioning this statement that was made by the United States in the General Assembly in 1949. But I think I am out of time, so we'll have some opportunity during Q&A, I think, to pursue some of these matters.
Thank you very much, Professor Quigley. Ambassador Areikat, please.
Thank you, Professor Quigley. It's a pleasure to be back here, Yusuf. I remember when we were at the Negotiation Affairs Department, we would come here with the legal advisors of the Negotiation Support Unit. And the issue, I think the Professor Quigley provided an important legal background, and I just would like to add maybe a couple of points to what he said. On the committee can drag its feet and not submit the request to the UN General Assembly. I think they have done that recently. I forgot with which country, for almost 9 months, and they can continue to delay it if the US would put pressure with Macedonia. If they continue to put pressure on this committee, it can take very long time. They have to transfer the issue to the UN General Assembly because the UN Security Council does not have the mandate to veto or prevent a country from being admitted as a full member of the United Nations. They can only delay the submission of that request to the UN General Assembly. And in this scenario, the UN General Assembly has to vote 2/3 in favor of admitting that state. The other thing is interesting is that the Palestinians can actually submit it every day. We can decide to have the US veto that every day or every other day, and if it's going to be a political confrontation, which I hope we will not reach to that point, we can, every other day, every week, every weekend, just submit it and just get another veto against our admission to the UN as a full member state. Finally, it was the Soviet Union or the USSR that used this privilege 52 times since the United Nations was established. And the last actually 6 times were used by the United States, not by the Soviet Union. And they were against Vietnam, against other countries. China used it twice. So out of all this, someone will think that the US maybe, no, it was the Soviet Union. Another interesting observation is that the Soviet Union used their veto to prevent Jordan from 1949 to 1955 of becoming a full member of the United Nations. And I think it all had to do with the political situation at the time. So anyhow, here I want to cover with whatever time left for me after these clarifications, the political implications. First of all, a lot of misconceptions here about the meaning of the Palestinian move. Some talk about a unilateral declaration, which is completely untrue. We did declare a state in 1988. And anyhow, it's not unilateral. When you go to a body that consists of 192 countries, represent the whole world, and you tell them this is what I want to do, and I want you to accept me legally, legitimately, this is not considered a unilateral move. It's only a word that is used by Israel and its supporters here to show that the Palestinians are breaching their previous commitments and obligations, as if the Israelis are honoring their commitments and obligations. And therefore, it's not a unilateral declaration or a step. Secondly, recognition, as Professor Quigley explained, takes place between sovereign states. When Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay recognized us in January and December, they didn't need to go to the United Nations for approval. It happens between two sovereign states. They can recognize us as a state, but as he mentioned, it does not mean that we will be full member of the United Nations. So we are not going for recognition again, which is another misconception that is widely used here, especially by Israel and its the lobby, the pro-Israel lobby in this country and on the Hill. Thirdly, what we are doing is we're going for admission. Admission to the UN. That's what we are going. We are not going after unilateral declarations or recognition. We're going after admission. We can do it two ways, going through the same mechanism that Professor Quigley described, and then if the UN Security Council transfers it to the UN General Assembly, we need 2/3, and we will be a full member state of the UN. The other option, to avoid any delay tactics by a permanent member of UN Security Council, is to go straight to the UN General Assembly. It has not done before, but we can do that. And what we need is only 50+1 to become a non-member state of the United Nations. Now, the Palestinian leadership is assessing its alternatives and its options. They haven't decided yet which course they will take, but there is a determination in the absence of a viable alternative, a viable political alternative. There is a determination on the part of the leadership to pursue this objective and this goal and go to the United Nations. We have been in discussions with the administration for the last few months. What happened yesterday at the Quartet meeting does not bode well, because it's evident, unfortunately, that the differences, what the gaps that they are trying to close are not between the Israelis and Palestinians, because these gaps are well known and they didn't need to close these gaps. Supposedly these should be left for negotiations. Isn't that what we always hear, that the parties should sit and close the gaps? The gaps that are being trying to be bridged are between the same members of the quartet. And it's clear that UN, Russia, EU probably are on one side on this issue and the United States on another side again. In March and April, the US succeeded twice in canceling the quartet meetings that were supposed to issue statements to get the process moving forward. So once again, while the administration is asking us not to go to the United Nations, and while we are telling them to create that viable alternative for us to return based on clear terms of reference, once again, the administration is trying to convince us that this outcome of statehood and admission to the UN must be the product of negotiations. And we ask, what negotiations? If we cannot convince the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli government to accept the basis that the whole world accepts today, that it has to be 1967 plus agreed swaps, it has to be certain principles and parameters that even children at elementary schools all over the world understand today. If we cannot convince him to accept that, how can we sit? On what future state can we, as Palestinians, negotiate? So Israeli actions actually are trying to undermine and completely destroy the two-state solution. The Palestinian effort is, on the contrary, is aimed at preserving the two-state solution. What Israel is doing on the ground, the facts that they are imposing, the settlements, the confiscation of land, the ethnic cleansing in East Jerusalem, now they are targeting Palestinian neighborhoods in Jerusalem. They are no longer building in quote-unquote Jewish neighborhoods. They are building in Sheikh Jarrah, they are building in Wadi Joz, They are building in Shafat. They are trying to change the demographic balance in Jerusalem. It's no longer adding a room to a school or another room to a house so that they can accommodate newly born Israelis in these illegal settlements. They are targeting the Palestinian Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem. So the Clinton parameters are history now, because Israel in the last 11 years changed what used to be an Arab is Palestinian and what is Jewish is Israeli. So this is exactly what Israel is doing, undermining, destroying the two-state solution. And we are, on the contrary, telling the United States and the international community what we are trying to do by going to the UN and getting this admission and a recognition of a state on the 1967 borders. We are actually telling our people first that the two-state solution is still viable. Because what is the alternative? A continuation of the status quo, which Israel would love to see. They are no longer paying the price of the occupation. Occupation is being subsidized by the international community. Security is in their hands. They can enter Palestinian areas at any time, arrest whoever they want, do whatever they want. And everything else, the cost of the occupation are being subsidized by the international community. So Israel is comfortable. Why should they rush in making peace with the Palestinians? I'm not saying that this is an accurate assessment on their part. Of course, it's not, because there are other factors that will definitely change these Israeli assumptions. So we are also not in the business of delegitimizing Israel. We are in the business of legitimizing Palestine. By going to the United Nations to seek admission and recognition of a Palestinian state, how are we undermining the state of Israel? We are going to state clearly that the state we want to build will be in the 1967 borders, a state that can live in peace and security with Israel. And we told the US administration that we are willing to take into considerations all the concerns of Israel the same way that we discussed it with them and with the US administration in the last 2 years. So this is not an effort to isolate or delegitimize Israel. Trying to create a state that is admitted to the UN and recognized by the international community is an objective, a goal for the Palestinian people, and has nothing to do with delegitimizing of Israel or isolating Israel. Now, we are still waiting to see that statement. I believe that they are still meeting today. They have not issued a statement yet, unless they did, and I'm not aware of it. On the 16th of this month, the Arab Follow-Up Committee will be meeting in Cairo at the request of Palestine to assess the Quartet Statement and to jointly with the Palestinian take a decision on what is the next move. But in the absence of a viable political alternative that will clearly determine the terms of reference for any future political process, we are not going to engage in a process for the sake of wasting time. Allow Israel, allow Prime Minister Netanyahu to continue to plant Palestinian land and territory with illegal settlements and continue with their occupation, humiliation, and oppression of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are basically fed up, and they are not going to allow for this status quo to continue. Their eyes are on September, and given all the changes that are happening in the region, nobody can predict what will happen. I mean, we are still committed to nonviolent, peaceful resistance, and our leadership will continue to encourage Palestinians to resort to nonviolent and peaceful resistance, but the Palestinian people are not going to tolerate the continuation of the Israeli military occupation. When they look at South Sudan, I mean, a country that we wish all the best. Our foreign minister was there, and we recognize South Sudan, a country that basically does not have the elements and the bases and the components or attributes of sovereignty that the Palestine would have. is being recognized by the United States and by Europe and the international community. And Palestine as a state will be vetoed if we take our case to the UN in September. So I think that the only way that the Palestinians will reconsider is if the international community can provide viable basis and alternatives for negotiations based on a clear terms of reference, clear time frame, during which Israel must refrain from their settlement activities, especially in East Jerusalem, because you cannot convince me as a Palestinian that you want peace and you are sincere about peace when you are trying to change the demographic and legal status of the territories that are occupied by Israel. Thank you very much.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Areikat from Al-Quds Daily Newspaper. Thank you for taking my question. My question is to Ambassador Maen Areikat. Could you clarify, you said something that the Clinton point ceased to be an option. Could you just clarify that? But my follow-up question is that yesterday, Secretary Clinton in a press conference actually cited the Sudanese example as a road to negotiate and not and to refute what you just said. So if you could respond to that. You said that the outcome of the state in southern Sudan was done through negotiations. And second, you also said that Israel today enjoys occupation without having to pay for it. So what would be the logical conclusion in this case? Shouldn't the Palestinian Authority find it that it's high time to really just close shop and perhaps let Israel bear the cost of the occupation? Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed. The first was on the Clinton parameters, right?
Yeah, if you could explain.
Well, during in the aftermath of Camp David in December, in particular of 2000, President Clinton convened both the late President Arafat and the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and then he submitted what has become later as the Clinton parameters. And on the issue of Jerusalem, he came up with an idea, that thought would be acceptable to both. By the way, we did not reject the Clinton parameters. We did not accept them, but we did not reject them at the same time. That said that whatever Jewish will be Israeli, whatever Arab will be Palestinian in Jerusalem. This is in 2000, and you have been there, and you saw the accelerated planting of settlements and expansion of settlements, especially in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. So even some of these parameters that the administration and some Israelis are alluding to, I don't know if they are valid anymore, because of the fact that Israel has changed so much in its favor and made the Arab neighborhoods much smaller and the Jewish neighborhoods much larger, and therefore making that difficult to apply today. On Sudan, two different situations there. I don't think the South Sudan was under occupation. The Southern Sudanese were part of the overall Sudan. They were an ethnic group who wanted to have their own state that would represent their own identity. Mostly Christians or actually atheists, not Christians. The Christian percentage of them is very small, by the way. I was surprised to know that the other day from the Sudanese ambassador. But there is no comparison between the two. From the beginning, the international community supported their request. I don't know if South Sudan was in a different location of the world, whether the United States and Western Europe will support it. So we can go on and on and on about that. I don't think there should be any comparison between the two situations. But if the United States is so excited about the outcome, I think they should encourage the UN to support the Palestinian quest for admission instead of threatening to veto that. On the dissolution of the Palestinian Authority, this is an old question. I think before we can embark on a step like that, we have to carefully assess the implications, the political vacuum, the security vacuum that will be created as a result, who is going to fill in that vacuum. Two, the authority, yes, maybe it failed to bring about an end to the Israeli occupation and the establishment of a Palestinian state, but it also provided the Palestinian with the foundation of statehood and provided them with a national address that many believe should be preserved, while at the same time we expose Israeli policies and actions. Thank you.
We're just going to ask a question from the internet here, and then we'll continue with our questions from the room. This one comes from Josh Rubner, and I think it may be directed to Professor Quigley. It doesn't specify, but both of you can take your shot at it. There's some debate as to whether the General Assembly could invoke the, quote, Uniting for Peace procedure to circumvent a Security Council veto to admit Palestine as a full UN member. Could you please give us your opinions on this?
Well, I think the General Assembly could act actually without needing to refer to the Uniting for Peace resolution. The Uniting for Peace resolution is a resolution of the General Assembly from 1950 that says that if the Security Council is unable to deal with a particular issue relating to war and peace as a result of the veto of a permanent member, that the matter can be taken up by the General Assembly, which can then make recommendations as to what should be done. In this situation, it seems to me that there's really not a need to resort to that, although I mean that could be a way that you would respond to a veto in the Security Council, but and then you would have to make the argument that the admission of Palestine as a UN member is relates to war and peace, which would be an argument that you could probably make, but I don't think you necessarily need to get into that to get the matter properly before the General Assembly.
Thank you. If you want to add, if you don't want to add anything, we'll continue on with the questions. Right here in the front, if you could just wait a moment for the microphone.
Ambassador Areikat, I'm with Canadian Broadcasting. I'm just wondering, because Professor Quigley alluded to the 25 days, so I'm wondering if we don't see anything by the end of July, should we conclude that the decision has been made not to go the Security Council route?
Well, you know, first of all, I think there is a time frame. You know, you need to submit, but the deadline is the end of July for us to submit our request to the Secretary General in order for it to be considered. I mean, we are what, 19 days, 20 days? This month is 31 days. We are almost 20 days away from that deadline, and unless something really happens, and you know, from now until the end of the month, that will be satisfactory to the Palestinians, that there is seriousness on the part of the international community to engage this time to end the occupation and end the conflict and allow for this issue of statehood to be a product of a meaningful negotiations, I think that we will submit at the end of the month our request to the UN Secretary General to consider it.
So, right there, yeah, and then we'll continue on.
My name is Abe Manazra from Chicago. I'm wondering with Professor Quigley if you can shed light on the impact of this resolution if it passes and the General Assembly recognizes Palestine as a member state. What is the impact legally on the occupying power if Israel stays in the territories? And to Ambassador Areikat, I'm wondering why is it this year? I mean, why didn't this happen last year or the year before with the Palestinians?
The question is a very pertinent one. I mean, Israel is already under an obligation to withdraw from the occupied territories, so that whatever you consider the status of Palestine, it doesn't change that fact. I think it may make it possible for Palestine to press the matter more aggressively if it is a member of the United Nations. But technically, it doesn't change anything with regard to the obligation of Israel to withdraw.
On the issue of timing, I think we started talking about this more publicly after President Obama delivered his speech at the UN General Assembly last year, and in which he said that hopefully when the UN General Assembly next year convenes, we hope that we will have a new member, Palestine, the state of Palestine, to be admitted. But I mean, you know, we don't. I'm not saying that it was a commitment on his part, or you know, it was a hopeful statement, and it encouraged us because at the time we were trying to get the political process moving, and we failed because if you remember last year, Prime Minister Netanyahu refused to extend the moratorium despite all appeals from everybody in the world so that they can give peace. It's interesting. I was reading yesterday the comments of all news agencies on the Quartet Statement. The only one that really said the truth was AFP. AFP said that this process collapsed when Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu in September refused to extend the moratorium on settlement freeze despite demands and urgings by everybody. They are the only one who really mentioned the reason behind the lack of progress. You know, everywhere else you see statements trying to squarely blame the two sides, asking both to engage, overcome, and people forget that we came here in September of last year, and the United States told us, all what you need to do is just come to the summit with King Abdullah and President Mubarak and President Obama, and this is all what you need to do. We will never ask you of anything else if you came here and just sat with them. We did. We told them what will happen if Netanyahu on the 26th does not extend the moratorium. They said, well, we will make, you know, clear that we will tell him we are against, etc., and that's where we are now. So, failure to convince Israel to return to the negotiating table and to make them stop with all their, you know, facts on the ground, fait accompli policies. Statement made by President Obama. And thirdly, the Palestinian Authority has been embarking on a campaign to build its institutions and build capacities that supposedly will end at the end of August, July, August, and we thought that would be a good timing to tell the world that we are ready to govern ourselves and we are not incapable of doing that, looking at other states that are being declared independent and admitted to the United Nations.
Let's go back over to this side of the room now, right here in the back.
Thank you both for the presentations, and thanks to the interns for setting it up. Oh, my name is Phyllis Bennis from the Institute for Policy Studies. I have a quick question for each of you. John, on the question of the state of Palestine joining the Rome Treaty to become a member of the International Criminal Court, there's been some discussion that there might be a way that Palestine could join as if they were joining 5 years ago or 8 years ago when the court began, and have jurisdiction to the past. Do you know anything about that? Is that possible? And Ambassador Areikat, my question for you, you referenced this notion of a national address. And my question is, if this happened, and there are some serious advantages to it, like joining the Rome Treaty, it seems that there's some disadvantages as well, one of which is that it means that suddenly the national address is now the PA in whatever form it is, hopefully a unified form, but the PLO disappears. The PLO's been in trouble anyway. It hasn't been able to function very well lately. But there's hope among an awful lot of Palestinian refugees that their only hope for ensuring the right of return has to do with the PLO remaining the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, and not the government, whether it's an authority like the PA or an actual government inside the Palestinian territories. So could you speak to that impact? Thank you.
Yes, on the ICC, this is the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court that provides for the possibility of international prosecution for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And as far as Palestine is concerned, I think one of the more interesting possibilities is that one of the war crimes identified in the Rome Statute is the establishment of civilian settlements in occupied territory, which of course is an ongoing issue, so there wouldn't be any question of needing to go into the past on that. And of course, Palestine in January of 2009 filed a declaration subjecting itself and anyone else who may have committed crimes in the territory of Palestine, going back to the time when the court's jurisdiction commenced, which was July 1, 2002. And certainly now there's an issue because the prosecutor hasn't been able to decide for the last year and a half whether Palestine is a state, because if it is a state, then its declaration is valid. And certainly these activities at the UN that are being pursued now will make it clearer that Palestine is a state, and would make it very difficult, I think, for the prosecutor to say, I'm not going to deal with these issues because I don't think Palestine is a state. So I think what's going on now has very significant implications for what matters can be brought before the International Criminal Court, including the Gaza war.
On the issue of the PLO and what will become of the PLO if we get admitted and become a full member, recognized, I cannot really comment a lot on that. But all what I can tell you that part of our also legal work right now currently is to think about the day after scenario. I mean, we have an Israeli side which is threatening to abandon the Oslo Accords again, as if they haven't done already, you know, and you know, what would become of the PLO if we have a state? I mean, it's only my assumption. Again, we still exploring these options. I would assume that whatever responsibilities the PLO was taking as a representative body in exile, if the state is recognized and admitted, that it will be you know, turned over to the state, which also means that, you know, whatever state will have also responsibilities and obligations, because we will become a member state, and for example, if an attack takes place against Israel from our territory, we have to be prepared to be liable before the UN body for such attacks. So there are also legal responsibilities on our shoulders if we become a full member of the United Nations. That we should be able to deal with it if and when it happens, not only in terms of what the role of the PLO and how we would represent the Palestinian diaspora, but also our obligations vis-a-vis our neighbors. And you know, that would mean that we have to, because as Professor Quigley said, we have to accept the UN Charter. We have to, you know, to prove this and that. And you know, the Israelis may decide at one point that they want to go to the UN to submit a complaint against the Palestinian state. So we are looking at all these options.
Thank you. As we're starting to run down on time, I'm just going to ask that you keep your questions to one question so we can get as many as possible. In the back of the room, the hand raised. Right there. Go ahead.
Thank you. James Kitfield from National Journal Magazine. Mr. Ambassador, could you explain what you see as, you talk about the gaps between the quartet's positions, and you imagine that there's 3 against 1, and I imagine you're probably right. I'm curious whether what you're hearing from your European, Russian, UN interlocutors about what movement they're trying to make and trying to bring the UN closer to them to fill some of those gaps?
Actually, nothing. We are not hearing anything. When we met with U.S. officials only last week, they told us that they have made a pact among all the members that they will not say anything before the statement is released, and they cited previous leaks that hurt their work in the past. So we are not hearing anything from them. My assumption is that the quartet is more concerned about September, more concerned about the political impact on Europe if, you know, the Palestinians go, and you know there is strong support within Europe at all levels for the Palestinians and their quest for freedom and independence. If they go and, for example, do not vote in favor or take a position against. So they are more concerned, they're trying to maybe talk it over with the US to try to find a formula that will be acceptable to the Palestinians, and of course they want to find a formula acceptable to the Israelis that do. And I think my personal assumption that this is what delaying the statement.
Okay. Let's go over here to that side of the room again. There's someone on the side. We'll come back to the side.
Hi, Wasim Mardidi from the Foundation for Middle East Peace. And this is for Ambassador Areikat. You mentioned you might sidestep the Security Council and go directly to the General Assembly. Could you just explain what that might entail, how you might approach that, and what challenges you might see?
Going to the General Assembly?
Yeah, you said going to the General Assembly as a second option, just going directly to the General Assembly to seek statehood.
Yeah, you know, in the first scenario that Professor Quigley explained, you have to go to the request to the Secretary General. Security Council must approve it. Actually, all the members of the Security Council must approve it, but most importantly, the 5 who have the veto power. And it will be turned over to the UN General Assembly if they don't object to it, a 2/3 vote. You have here the UN Security Council, the 5 members who have veto, to authorize that it will be reviewed by the UN General Assembly. Okay. Now the other option is just to go straight to submit a request to go to the UN General Assembly for a non-member state. In the first case, you become full-fledged member of the United Nations. In the other one, you become a non-member state, and this needs only 50+1. So during the session, if you have 100 countries attending, 51 will be sufficient to grant you that that status. You know, these are 2 options that are available. The Palestinian leadership did not decide on what option. They will consult with the Arab Follow-up Committee in Cairo on the 16th to make a decision.
Let's go back over here. Just wait one moment for the microphone, then we'll come over here.
Hello, my name's Elliot. I'm a student from England. My question is this. Most people seem to expect the bid to fail in September because of US veto. And obviously, should it be successful, it will be problematic with regard to the relationship between the PA and Hamas, the presence of IDF troops still in the West Bank. So my question is, to what extent is this gambit in order to force concessions from Israel, or to what extent is it like a genuine attempt to end the conflict this year?
First of all, we don't take gambits, risk the interest and the rights of our people to force concessions. What concessions do you want to force from Israel? You concede something that is yours. You don't concede something that is not yours. So when they accept to give back the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem to the Palestinians, they are only complying with international law and UN resolutions. This is the land that was occupied by force, not recognized by even the United States of America. And therefore, we are not actually the ones who made the historic concessions and compromise in 1988 when we accepted the state in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem on 22% of what used to be historic Palestine. The Israelis now want us to compromise on the compromise. They want us to give up 11% of the 22%. And this will never happen. So this is not a ploy. It's not a trick. We don't gamble with the future of our people by going to the United Nations. We are going there to make to deliver a very clear message. The status quo will not continue. The Palestinians are not going to accept to be under the only military occupation left in the world, unless some people call Afghanistan and Iraq military occupations. But this is the longest military occupation in history and the only one left. Why should the Israeli occupation be treated differently by lawmakers in this country and elsewhere when they know that it is illegitimate and illegal? So this is a coordinated, well thought of, very carefully studied approach that we are taking. We want to tell our people that there are options other than the failure of the negotiations to produce independence and statehood. So we are not after symbolic victories or victories on paper. No, we know exactly where we are heading. We know what the implications of that, and we are pursuing it unless a viable alternative is provided.
Right here in the front.
Hi, I'm Dina. I'm from Al Jazeera. If you could just elaborate on what are the implications on the ground. I have yet to fully understand how this does benefit the Palestinians on the ground.
Well, I'm not telling you that the Israelis will pull out their troops the next morning. The implication, the situation will become even more difficult for the Palestinians. But at least it will set in motion our practical approach to end the military occupation and move towards the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, Professor Quigley alluded to that, but there are also benefits that will come with that. I mean, when we become a member state of the UN or a non-member state of the UN, we will enjoy certain privileges that will enable us to put pressure on Israel legally to stop their policies and their violation of international law and the rights of the Palestinian people. It is a situation that is much better than now, when the Israelis have a free hand of doing what they want without being even asked or questioned. At least it will make the Israeli people think carefully about where their leadership is taking them. Those who say that this is something that will not have an impact on Israel are wrong. Israelis are very sensitive to the idea of being isolated, and they are already telling their leadership, what are you doing? You should be the first to recognize a Palestinian state. Netanyahu yesterday recognized South Sudan. He said, I'm willing to help them and provide everything for them. How ironic. So, there is going to be an impact on Israel. Whoever tells you, and maybe we will not feel the benefits as Palestinian, but the Israelis will feel a change in international attitude, and they will start to feel that things are different on the ground, that they don't have a free hand of continuing to violate Palestinian human and national rights.
Okay, we're gonna take 3 final questions. I'd like to take them together because we are running out of time. So if you could just tell us your question quickly right here in the back, and then we'll go here, and then all the way in the back. I know you've been waiting patiently.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Anne Kringle. Ambassador Areikat, you said that you hope to return to the 1967 borders where a state that will live in peace and nonviolent peaceful resistance. But then you just said now that you're not sure that it will make a difference right now for Palestinians on the ground. So I'm just wondering if you do desire to return to the 1967 borders of peace, but you're not sure how it will help Palestinians on the ground. And Professor Quigley, you just said that any peaceful state willing to carry out responsibilities must be admitted according to the Charter. With the combination of Hamas and Fatah with the reconciliation, I was just wondering how that peace will occur and what steps you'll take to ensure that it will happen for both sides. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll go right up here.
Thank you, Michael Thomas. Ambassador Areikat, you're here in the U.S., and I know you follow these issues very closely, the Senate passed a resolution overwhelmingly that essentially threatened funding of the Palestinian Authority if he went forward. Ambassador Rice at the UN made a statement which came alarmingly close to saying that she wasn't sure that the administration could stop the stop the United States Congress from defunding the U.S. contribution to the UN. Can you tell us what you know about the state of play of those and what the PLO might do in response if either of those things were to occur?
Okay, and then in the back corner, gentleman in green shirt's been waiting for quite some time.
Hi, I'm Ricardo Gonzalez from the newspaper El Mundo. I wanted to ask the ambassador if you are completely sure that you have the votes, the 2/3 of the votes in the General Assembly, and also if you have any feedback from the European governments about what they would vote in the event that the vote takes place in the General Assembly. Thank you.
Okay. You want to answer the one on Hamas and Fatah, and then I'll take the others?
Okay. Yeah, this question, Ms. Kringle's question relates to, I guess, the peace-loving character of Palestine, whether, is that...
With the reconciliation, one of the concerns that the United States has is that it might become a possible terrorist organization that has a power share. I'm just wondering how the Palestinian government will make sure that that doesn't happen, and how we can be sure that there will be.
Well, I mean, I think if Palestine is accepted as a state, it's going to be, as the ambassador said, incumbent on the states to ensure that it does engage in activity that is peaceful only. It's never really been figured out exactly what this peace-loving matter means, and there have been many states that have been admitted to the UN where they have engaged in activity that one might consider not to be peace-loving. When Israel submitted its application in November of 1948, Henry Katan, who was the representative of the Arab Higher Committee, objected to the application, and he said, look, here you have an entity that has just forced most of the population out of the country and it won't let them back in. How can you consider it to be peace-loving? And a few months later, Israel was admitted by a 2/3 vote of the General Assembly. With respect to the 2/3 vote, actually, this is the question from Mundo. In the General Assembly, the important issues, and this is such an issue in admission of a state, are to be decided by 2/3 of the members present and voting. And that means that any state that abstains is not counted in the total. So that if, for example, you had states in Europe that decided to abstain on the vote, those numbers would be deducted from the total. And I think that could be a very important consideration.
Well, it's important, since you mentioned Israel, as mentioned, the admission to the UN. Israel was admitted to the United Nations. I think it was 257, if I'm not wrong, or 275. Was conditional on the establishment of an Arab state in Palestine, and the UN admitted Israel, but given that Israel will allow an Arab state to be established in Palestine, but 48 to now 63 years, we still don't have a Palestinian Arab state in Palestine. I was confused a little bit about the first question. No changes on the ground, 67. I think our stated policy is a state within the 1967 borders with agreed swaps, with equal agreed minimal swaps between the two states, and this remains to be our position. The two-state solution remains to be our position, and yes, we expect the future Palestinian state to live in peace and security with the state of Israel. We have even went further by saying that we are willing to sign a treaty that will end all claims, all historical claims, and end the conflict. We have been telling the Israelis that for the last 10 years, but I don't know, they maybe don't understand what the word of ending all historical claims. So the end game for us is a Palestinian state in the West Bank, Gaza, with East Jerusalem as its capital, and agreed upon and just solution to the Palestinian refugee problem based on UN General Assembly 194. But when we say agreed upon, we are clearly saying with Israel, agreed upon, not with the United Nations or with the United States or with China. It has to be agreed upon with Israel. So the Arab Peace Initiative provides basis for that. On the issue of the Senate, I mean, we can't force them not to comply with what AIPAC sends to them and what to say and not what to say. You listen to the statements made by officials of the Israeli embassy, officials of the Prime Minister of Netanyahu, and lawmakers here, and you say, wow, they're reading from the same script, and I think it will be a major mistake to try to use pressure on the Palestinians. This is an issue of dignity, and we are not going to allow anybody to use their influence. The United States is the largest single donor to the Palestinian people. Single donor, I said, as a bloc. The EU, the European Union, is. But in direct budgetary support, I think they only provide between $150 to $200 million. Most of their support and assistance is channeled through aid organizations that eventually come back. They don't stay, there. So I don't think it's a good idea to refer to that. And we know that the administration understands our position. As a matter of fact, today, Assistant Deputy Secretary ADS Jake Wallace was on the Hill, in which he said that support for the Palestinian Authority is crucial. This is a two-way traffic. Hey, nobody does things for each other these days because they like them or they like the color of their eyes or anything. They are doing that not because they know that we are a strategic, important player in the region. And we have been working closely and constructively with the Obama administration and with the United States to make sure that the situation remains stable in the region. So if the lawmakers are thinking of a different scenario, then we cannot stop them. But at least we know that the administration understands the pivotal role that the Palestinian Authority is playing, President Abbas, his Prime Minister, and the PLO, in trying to bring about peace, security, and stability to the region. On the other issue, I think Professor Quigley answered you on the 128. We don't know how the Europeans are going to cast their votes. They are saying we have to wait and see what is the nature of the resolution. A lot depends on what is going right now, deliberations and efforts. I think if they reach a conclusion that they have done their best, but for some reasons the US is not coming along, or Israel continues to be intransigent, I think that will impact the way that they will vote in September. But we cannot predict how they will cast their votes. We have countries who expressed strong support within the European Union. There are countries who said we'll wait until September, and countries are faltering, that it has to be a product of bilateral negotiations. So we don't know for sure on Western Europe what will the voting be. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our presentation, question and answer session for today. Certainly we will all be monitoring these events very closely. Professor, Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.